My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and Denis. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic, multiverses, mega Christmas, Grinch's franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
Or a telescope this time, because space. Wow, that was a terrible introduction to the episode. But it does happen on different planets, so I'm not completely wrong either.
Beeper, I'm glad to hear you're alive. Are you feeling better?
Yes.
Our listeners know that you were sick last week, so...
Yeah, that was unpleasant.
I can only imagine. I've been fairly fortunate in the midst of all this pandemic stuff to... I mean, I'm normally not one to get sick. Like, I don't ever use all the sick days that are available to me, but especially in COVID, I have been fortunate not even to catch a cold, so I'm starting to lose track of what it's like to be sick.
Yeah, upon discussion with people and rediscovery, it seems I might have just had a bad reaction to medication that made me extremely sleepy to the point where, yeah, I slept through the podcast. It was very unfortunate.
That's okay. We had one shot here to help us celebrate the 5-year anniversary of the podcast, and we have another milestone coming up very soon, so really there's no need to be sad. We're here to talk about Dune today. Let's talk about our secret origin segments, our SOS. I don't really remember. I don't think I ever heard about... If I heard about Dune, it was maybe because it was on some list of like obscure cult classics of movies.
Okay. I was like... Yeah, so sorry. Yeah. The movie Dune, of course.
But I really don't think I knew much about it until the announcements about this new one being made were a thing. And then I start hearing a bunch of people all have opinions on Dune, including yourself. So I'm pretty green coming into having seen the new film.
Right. Well, yeah, because I guess... So I never heard of the Dune movie until after I'd read the books. So that was a thing. So I read the Dune books when I was somewhere in high school. I don't remember exactly. And they're not, that's not really a cult classic. They're kind of just classics, right? It's one of the major sci-fi series, up there with Hitchhiker's Guide and the Foundation, which apparently is getting a miniseries. Crazy things are happening, and I'm not keeping up with them. So then I saw the Dune movie much later because I'd heard about it by reputation. I didn't want to watch it until I got more into watching So Bad It's Good things, and then it definitely fit the bill for that. Although there were good efforts to do certain things, and I think it was probably a good thing that movie existed because the Dune books are kind of tough to adapt. And that movie kind of highlighted what not to do for certain situations, which I think was really good that it existed. And, it still gave us some fun things. I mean, Patrick Stewart was a fun Gurney Halleck, and it visually was pretty, well done for the time. And so... it was nice.
I don't know. I watched the Honest trailer, and their little shield things looked pretty bad.
Oh, okay, yeah, but like, but I think that was also like a situation of them like trying to overreach given what technology existed.
Yeah. Well, to give a bit of a secret origin for the series, the original Dune novel was published in 1965, written by Frank Herbert. And as you pointed out, it's a series, so there's 5 books in total in the whole series. Is that correct?
Dune, Messiah, Children of Dune, Heretics of Dune, God Emperor of Dune. Unless I'm mistaken, there are technically 6, but the 6th one wasn't written by Frank Herbert. It was
Yeah, I saw
Chapter
something that
House
like
Dune.
his son did some
Yes,
stuff
Chapter House
after he
Dune was
passed away.
finished by
And apparently it's regarded as one of the best sci-fi novels of all time. So it certainly is in high esteem. And I think the first book itself is like 500 pages long.
That sounds about right. Yeah, it looks about that thick. I could go pick it up. Actually, I'm going to go pick it up.
I have a friend who recently purchased the Dune book to read it because he was hoping to read it before he sees the movie. And in addition to like the 500 pages,
yeah, my version is about 500 pages.
Yeah, in addition to the 500 pages, there's like addendums to like explaining like the politics and the religion and all these like kind of all these details of the world at the back of the book, and of course
those aren't that long though.
No, but it's just how many novels do you know that actually even bother to have that? Like, in light of the conversations we've had about Tolkien and world building, and like, you know, our episode a few weeks ago on constructed languages, and like, you know, how much effort can be put into all this stuff, it's just interesting, I suppose, that, you know, people are gonna, I don't remember when Lord of the Rings was published, like the 50s. The Hobbit was like the 30s or something. Anyway, the point is,
yeah,
post Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I think because World War II happened between the two, I'm pretty sure. But I don't know. I also kind of I feel like it is more like you kind of pointed out Lord of the Rings, and I was trying to list other things that have that, and it does tend to be fantasy novels. Because I was thinking, yeah, no, Game of Thrones has that, and Wheel of Time has that, and the Discworld. Oh yeah, they're all fantasy novels. So it is a little more uncommon for sci-fi to kind of dig into that. Although you do still sometimes get that kind of world building. Like if you think about all of Isaac Asimov's main series all exist within the same universe. So there is, but he mainly did it in the books and less in kind of extra materials. Whereas, yeah, I guess Dune and Lord of the Rings do it in extra materials, which is slightly a different approach, but to pretty much the same effect.
Yeah, and we talked about, you know, I think there's a huge part of the Dune history is the fact that it was adapted into a film in 1984 by David Lynch, who is like known as one of the more auteur kind of out there movie directors. People call Dune unfilmable because it is so dense and it is so full. Like, how do you condense 500 pages plus all the world building and all the other things into one movie? Apparently,
well, I guess the answer is don't.
And this is the thing. So apparently it was his intention to direct like a 3-hour plus movie for Dune, and someone with creative control edited the movie down to being just under, I think it was like 2 hours and 15 minutes. So they filmed extra content that was sort of cut out because like, we don't want this movie to be this long.
Yeah. I mean, it does feel like that too when you watch the movie, that there's just things that are missing in it.
Yeah, and it was edited down so much that David actually asked to have his name taken off the film, and there are certain cuts where it says it's directed by Alan Smithy. And I learned that in the Directors Guild, there's this clause where if a director doesn't want to be associated with a project anymore because they feel like it's no longer their vision, they can request to have their name taken off the movie. And if they go through this whole process and it's accepted, then it'll show that the movie was directed by Alan Smithy instead of whoever had actually filmed it. So
interesting.
If you go and look at Alan Smithy's IMDb, you'll see a bunch of bad movies because they're movies where the director didn't want their name attached to it.
I mean, that's kind of unfortunate for I don't know,
Anyone
for
with that
people who
name?
kind of I mean, I feel like the point of that name is that it's not it doesn't sound like, it sounds similar to what might be a common name, but it isn't.
Yeah. So the fact that David didn't want his name on the movie suggests that it didn't turn out as he had hoped. To try and condense that much of a story into like a 2.5 hour movie, it clearly didn't work because wasn't received well. It didn't make a lot of money. There's like a lot of narration in it where I guess they're trying to like get as much of the text from the book into the thing as possible.
I mean, it is slightly that, but it's also like when they say that Dune is unfilmable, part of it is also, and I think this applies more to the as you go further into the series, is that there is so much inner monologue going on in like in the books that you kind of completely miss out on if you have a movie. And that kind of becomes a problem because you don't you don't exactly know like how to portray that, because it is really hard. And when we get to talking about the movie, they did actually do that in some quite good ways, I think. Um but the basic principle of Dune would be, a lot of like just hearing what people are thinking, and that's not necessarily very helpful or very visually stimulating.
So since the 1984 films flop, for lack of a better word, it has developed a bit of a cult status because people can enjoy it for what it is. There have been many attempts to try and get a new Dune adaptation get launched off. There was like some mini series made for like a cable network that was made, and I didn't bother looking into that. But they've been
I've heard
working.
it's pretty good.
Okay, there you go. But there's been efforts since like 2017 to try and make a new film adaptation of Dune. And Legendary Pictures is the production company that got the rights to making it. They asked Denis Villeneuve to be the director, and he said that he didn't feel comfortable starting working on something like Dune until he was done working on Arrival and Blade Runner 2049. So it wasn't until late 2017, 2018 that he signed on as the director, and then it kind of, went on from there. He seemed like the perfect choice for this. The movies of his that I've seen, specifically Arrival and Blade Runner 2049, are both great movies in my opinion, and good, I guess, stepping stones to doing something like Dune.
They definitely have the big sci-fi element to them, which is somewhat important, and they stylistically are make choices that I think work for Dune.
Now this
But
movie,
it is a different scope. You know what I mean?
yes, yeah, it's definitely a bigger world because the sandworms are so big.
Yeah, among other things.
So like every movie that's been made in the last couple of years, there have been delays. It was originally supposed to come out like October 1st, 2020. So in the end, and its release date only changed like once. It was originally supposed to come in October 2020. They moved it to October 2021 or around there, and it stayed there. And it came out. I think it was supposed to come out October 1st, 2021, and then that got shifted up to October 22nd. So it had its date changed twice, but the second time was only moving it ahead a couple weeks.
Yeah, so that's pretty good by Doom's delay standards.
It's an opening weekend. It looking like it's grossed about $40 million, which is not the best sign considering how expensive this movie was probably.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate.
Now, the biggest factor here is that it was available for free on HBO Max in the United States the same day it was in theaters in the US. Whereas all the movies that have come out this month, Halloween Kills, Venom Let There Be Carnage, No Time to Die, they were all theaters only releases. So if you wanted to go see those movies, you had to go to the theater to watch them. So I don't
I
know.
guess it is proving that like that kind of that the release. I feel like that is a proof that the kind of double release does hurt the industry, because I don't know. I feel like that movie was good enough to do better and had enough hype and like history behind it that it should have.
Yes. Yeah. All the box office analysts I follow are basically saying that it was a mistake for Warner Brothers to commit for the entire calendar year of 2021 to say all our movies will be available on HBO Max. Because at this point, it is starting to hurt the box office for their films. I mean, if you think of it this way, it's like Dune made less than half of Venom 2's opening.
Yeah, and that makes no sense. I haven't seen Venom 2 yet, but like,
it's not as good a movie.
Okay, you will confirm what I suspected, that it is just not as good.
In fact, at this point, Venom 2 is the third highest grossing film of the year domestically, and it's only like $1.5 million behind Black Widow. So it'll eclipse Black Widow in no time. It's kind of insane. So I hope
that's crazy.
I hope Dune does better or finds legs for various reasons. But before we go any further, why don't you give us an attempt to give us a Blu-ray case description for 2021's Dune?
Right.
Only together can we stand a chance.
Dune is a visually stunning modern classic. It rumbles with epic grandeur. See the best film of the year on the biggest screen possible.
This is only the beginning.
Dune, rated PG-13, in theaters and on HBO Max, October 22nd.
In a time where the planets are colonized by a human empire, House Atreides is given the planet Arrakis, famed for the spice, essential for space travel, or hyperspeed space travel, and taken from their greatest rival, the Harkonnens. But things may not be as they seem, as the Emperor is plotting to have both the houses fight each other and be weakened. Follow Duke Leto as he tries to affirm his rule upon this planet, and mostly follow his son, who may be the chosen one for 3 different reasons, as they try to navigate through the betrayal and fail. And then we follow Paul into the next movie.
Yeah, so let's just start there. Everyone,
I hope that wasn't too spoilerish.
Well, everyone's like, you can't do Dune as one movie. They tried and it didn't work. And it seems like
certainly did.
It seems like Denis Villeneuve from day one was like, there's no way I'm going to try and do this as one movie. So literally, very like in the first seconds of the film, the title comes up, it says Dune, and then it comes up Part 1. And I'm like, okay, you're setting your expectations high here, movie. Like, there has been no official announcement of a sequel.
Not even like a part 2 to this one?
No, there's.
Oh.
So they're going all in. I was like, okay, I'm feeling the investment here. You're telling me this is part 1, and that sort of set my expectations to say, okay, this isn't going to try and adapt the whole, book in one movie.
Interesting. So I decided to find out as little as I could about this movie before seeing it, because I'm a huge fan of the series and I didn't want to already dislike it before seeing it. So I actually did not know. So when I saw part 1, I'm like, oh, he thinks they're going to do Dune Messiah after this, which is the second book. And it took me until the scene with the harvester, and then I was like, wait, this movie has been going on far too long to only be this far. Oh, okay, that's what they meant by part 1. Like, I always had the feeling that they were setting up way more things and taking more time in the setup, and I'm like, oh, you could get some of these events accelerated a little bit, but then it ended, and I was like, oh, okay, this is where we're ending it.
Now, as a fan of the series, are you happy they made this choice to split up the story?
Yes and no.
It's
I
always
was.
yes and no with you.
I know, but that's because I'm a complex person. Generally speaking, yes, because I think it would have been a failure of a movie if they hadn't. I just don't like where they stopped it, and I like very specifically the last thing that happened at the end of the movie. And there were things that I was kind of excusing when they happened at the beginning of the movie when I thought they were covering the whole first book. That later I was like, no, they could have done this differently. Given that they're only covering about half of the material, there were some changes that I feel should have been made. But I still think it was a good movie, and like it is mostly yes. I am mostly happy that they did half a movie. But now that I know they haven't confirmed the other half of the story, I'm really, really worried.
I was gonna
That
say,
it's just never going to happen.
How terrible would it be if we never get to see part 2 because it doesn't perform well enough financially at this point?
Oh man, it would be so terrible. It would mostly, I think it would annoy me more because I have a bunch of like things I'm trying to predict that might happen in the second movie, and a lot of decisions that were made in this movie, and I'm like, this might get justified by what they keep in the second half, but if I never find out, it's gonna suck.
Yes, I really enjoyed this. I think it's probably the best movie overall that I've seen since Spider-Man No Way Home in terms of just overall quality. There's only like one lingering question I
You
had.
haven't seen Spider-Man No Way Home.
Oh, Far From Home. Thank you.
Okay.
My heart wants to see that movie so bad it's acting like it's already happened and that I'm already loving it. But even Shang-Chi, there were like little things. I'm like, oh, like could have done that differently. I was like I had nitpicks. Whereas with this, probably because of my ignorance of the source material,
yeah,
there was only like.
I mean, you saw the notes I wrote for the movie. I have a lot of nitpicks, but most of the things I have are nitpicks. I will admit. Like, I think that it was a good movie, and like I did go see it with my wife, and Mjolnir has never read any of the books, and she enjoyed it. So I think that's a good like baseline for it too, that both of us enjoyed it.
Yeah, coming out of it, I only had 2 unanswered questions, and neither of them were like earth-shatteringly frustrating for me. I was just like, if I never know the answer to these 2 things, I'm fine with that.
Fair enough.
But because I don't have history with Dune, I did feel like I was drawing parallels to things that I'm familiar with. For example, Star Wars. There are different planets. There's a sand planet. There's a planet with water. There's an emperor who is orchestrating things and we never see. It's very easy to feel like. I realized the novel came out like a decade before Star Wars, but
so did the Foundation novels that definitely influenced Star Wars a lot more than Dune did.
Okay, I'm not familiar with these.
Other than maybe
novels.
like I do see some like. I think like the Sand People on and Tatooine generally have taken influence from Arrakis, a much less extreme version of it, but still, I do think there is something there. But the rest of it, I mean, is just kind of generic, space empire things.
And then there's people who have like the power to control people, so it feels like the Jedi mind trick, but just a more fleshed out version of that.
Ooh, immensely more fleshed out and much more complex, but yeah, I can see some resemblance. There are space witches, and there are space wizards in Star Wars. It's just that there's also space shapeshifters and space cloners, and which I guess are in Star Wars too. So maybe, who knows?
I'm just saying, as somebody who again doesn't know this source material, there were things in this that made me think of Star Wars, and I'm sure someone else who hasn't read Dune or seen the other movie would watch this and be like, oh, this is just like Star Wars. And
I think just like Star Wars is a bit...
Okay, it's a more complex version of Star Wars. Is that fair?
Fair enough. Sure.
It's like, what if Star Wars only took place on the sand planet?
Well, yeah, okay, but the reason why I say it's more like Foundation is because, unlike Star Wars, both of these series are based on the premise that the Galactic Empire is human.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Strictly.
Well, nonetheless, there were things about that made me think about Star Wars, which was a good thing because it didn't feel like, oh, like this is ripping off Star Wars, but more so it's like, okay, I liked Star Wars, so I should like this as well.
Mm-hmm.
There were also some things that happened in the movie that, with my Catholic faith, I couldn't help it. Like there's one moment where a character is like lying naked in like a corpus position.
Oh yeah.
And I was like,
no, I think that was intentional. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, there seems to be some symbolism here they're going for.
Yeah, there's pretty massive influence of Islam as well, but it's that Dune is basically a parallel for like the oil crisis and the control of the Middle East, right?
I'd heard about that, but I guess I didn't sit with that.
The movie does a very good job of hiding parts of that, which I think was intentional and I think is a good idea because it doesn't apply in the same way it did in the 60s, obviously. And I've watched a video on this that talked about Dune quite a bit, and yeah, they did point out that like even some of the terms, like the Arabic terms that are used in Dune, somebody who read the news would have known about them and would have like drawn the parallel very easily, whereas reading it now or seeing it now, it's a lot harder to see it.
Okay, interesting. Actually, now that I'm starting to like even now think about, oh yeah, I can see the parallel they're making there.
The resource that allows you to transport is controlled by the desert people.
Yeah.
That's the easy part of the analogy. The rest is a lot more complex.
Yeah. There's certainly a lot of talk about like messiahs and like it's almost like there's almost like a critique of that idea, which is an interesting idea to explore, I suppose, in a story like this.
Yeah. And I don't want to spoil things that may never come to pass, but like because there is kind of I don't know how much I can spoil, but like the critique of religion is very again more complex than just messianic traditions, because it does kind of go into a lot more of the kind of deep lore, especially with the Bene Gesserit, who kind of planted religions in different planets like hundreds of years before. And so part of it kind of comes from that, which is why they do care a lot about what Paul is in the movie.
Right. And I will say there was one scene in the movie that for me really spoke to me in terms of how I view God as a father, because there was a moment between a father and a son where the father is inviting the son to kind of take on his responsibility and take on this mantle that is being asked of him. And the son is expressing his unsureness of being ready for that. And the father says, no matter what you do, I love you and you're my son. And that's all that matters.
Yeah, this was something like Mjolnir pointed out, that like they did a really good job of making you care about the character of Duke Leto, which is good because you should, because he is objectively a good person, but also it adds to the emotional kind of crux of the story. It is very important that you care about Leto both as a leader, as a person, and as a father, and I think they did a really good job of that.
Yeah, but even like totally agree with that, but just it's so rare you see the message that you're good enough as you are and that you are loved for just being you. The fact that like a person's value isn't attached to their actions or what they do. It's just like, no, like just by your pure existence and being my son, I love you, and that's all you ever have to be. Like that is the message that God the Father has for me and for others as well. And you don't see that represented in these kind of stories. Often like a father's love is perceived as something you have to earn, and you have to make them proud and accomplish a thing before you can receive it. And
which, to be fair, Paul tries to do still, even though he knows that.
But that's relatable too, because we can hear that message that we are loved no matter what, and we still like tell ourselves that we need to do things. So I don't know if that's in the book or if that's something Denis threw in there or someone else, but whoever did, kudos.
Quote is kind of thrown in there, but like that feeling is Paul is very much loved by both his parents, and it is important to who he is and who he becomes.
So we actually got a piece of mail that is a review of the movie from our friend Professor F.
Oh.
Professor F couldn't be here today, so he sent us this note. It says, "I'm glad you're talking about Dune today. I would have liked to join you for the podcast, but obviously he's not he's not here. I've had a fascination with the story of Dune from a young age, having grown up playing the early 90s real-time strategy video game based on its world. And I finally got around to reading the book for the first time over the past few months, which definitely gave me a greater love for the story and a deeper appreciation of this latest movie." Have you played this RTS game he's talking about?
No, but I know of it. Because it is like it's the first proper RTS that was made, and it kind of made the genre exist. So it is in large part because of that other RTS, specifically StarCraft, exist.
Oh.
And that makes it pretty influential.
Overall, I thought the movie was great. I loved the stunning visuals and the effort that was put into capturing the feel of the Dune universe and of planet Arrakis, the main setting for the story. I also thought the casting choices were really good, as well as the acting and the dialogue. Most of all, though, I appreciate how the film remained so faithful to the spirit of the book. Even when characters or scenes were changed, I felt that the changes either helped to condense and streamline the story in an acceptable way, or in a way that still managed to preserve the essential ideas conveyed in the book. I have a few minor criticisms. As his friend pointed out, the dialogue was sometimes obscured by the music or sound effects.
Okay, so that wasn't just the theater we were in. Good to know.
Which could have taken away from the understanding of someone who hadn't read the book. Or maybe that was just because we saw it in IMAX, but you're saying it was...
We saw it in a small theater that had a big sound system, so I don't know if it's much better, but I feel like the sound mixing was a little bit off. Particularly like when Jessica's saying the litany against fear, which is iconic, and so I know it by heart, but if you don't, you kind of miss parts of it.
The movie also emphasized the romantic aspect of Paul's visions compared to the book.
I know, it's so weird.
But that's understandable since it was one of the few romantic elements in the whole movie.
Yeah, which I also find to be a little bit of a criticism. I think there should have been more between Jessica and Leto, because, yeah, that's more of a nitpick that I have.
Jessica's the mother and Leto...
Yes, Jessica's the mother and Leto's the dad. Sorry, I'm using the character's name.
Well, this is the problem is I was like, most of the characters' names I couldn't remember. For some reason, the one character's name that stood out is Duncan, Idaho. I'm like, I can remember your name. Probably
because it's Jason Momoa, and it's also one of the most iconic characters of the Dune series. Like, because I remember talking to Mjolnir, and she was like, yeah, I know that name somehow, but I didn't know most of the other things.
And then he goes on to say, when compared as a whole to the book, I think the movie fails to fully capture the complexity of the universe of Dune or the subtleties of its politics or characters, but I thought it came to doing so as could reasonably be expected. To me, this movie is the Dune equivalent of Peter Jackson's version of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And just as that version introduced Tolkien's world to a large new audience and inspired many of them to read the literary masterpiece, my hope is that Denis Villeneuve's version of Dune will introduce many people to that literary masterpiece as well. If I had to rate this movie, I'd give it an 8.5 out of 10. I can't remember how many bat jar cookies that would be, though.
Fair enough. I think I kind of agree with him about the comparison to the Lord of the Rings, but also in as much as I think there should be an extended edition that just covers a few more things.
So is like, I know we've brought up Lord of the Rings already, but in terms of just a dense novel trying to be adapted into film, is it a fair comparison to make?
Not really. See, the thing is, Lord of the Rings is a very straightforward story in a sense. Like, when you read Lord of the Rings, there isn't a lot of like inner dialogue. There's a lot of like descriptions, but like, if you had to boil down the story of Lord of the Rings to its simplest form, you could do so pretty easily. to boil down, and you could technically do it with Dune, but you'd be missing out on most of what's in there and most of what makes it a good story. Like if you take the complexities out of Lord of the Rings, it's still a good epic. If you take the complexity out of Dune, it's kind of nonsensical.
All right, so now that we've read Professor F's review, we're going to dive into all the things you want to talk about. And in terms of when or how we go into the spoiler verse, you can let me know when we're getting into spoiler territory.
But then I haven't divided it in spoiler free and spoilerish things. I think I can talk about all the things that I liked without going into spoilers, but then after that, I think I might have to go into it.
All right, here we go.
I might accidentally say something. So things that I liked. And some of these things, I kind of added some of Mjolnir's commentary. It felt like a lived-in world. I think that one was really good. It's true that, like, and it is partially because they were able to spend a lot of time establishing the world, but it did definitely feel like the politics of the world were real. The kind of different factions really existed and had meaning, and you got a surprisingly large amount of info dump and backstory without it appearing to be as such, which I think some of it was kind of lost on people who haven't read the books.
Yes.
But, oh yeah, like certainly some of it was, but I think maybe a bit too much was. But I still think it did a good job for what it is. Like, it worked very well as an introduction to the world. And to echo what Professor F said, the casting and the performances were excellent. Like the only one that, again, I'm nitpicking, but Josh Brolin as Gurney Halleck should have been a little more playful, in my opinion. At sometimes they also, this was one of the things I didn't like, or a nitpick, and I can't say because it's not a spoiler, but they axed the best line of the entire book, which is lovemaking is for, moods are for cattles and lovemaking. Which is weird because they talk about moods when they're fencing, and he just doesn't say the thing, and it really annoyed me. But yeah, no, the performances were great. They didn't use voiceover to do people's inner monologue, but they still found organic ways for inner monologues to be heard or whispered or said that still made sense and still worked and didn't like ruin the story or the characters, which is really impressive because after Paul has his visions, he starts speaking out loud of how he's processing the visions. And, Liet Kun is, the planetologist is kind of like saying out loud her little prayers to Shai Hulud, which in the book was completely internalized. And it was kind of the character trying to figure out whether they trusted Paul as the messianic figure that people think he might be or not. But in the movie, also because it was said in the Fremen tongue, it didn't seem like, the thing that everybody should turn towards her and be like, why are you saying that? So I think it was very well handled. I love the design of the Thopters being basically like dragonfly helicopters. That was just amazing. I think that's a big credit to Denis Villeneuve as having directed sci-fi properly. And I kind of talked about it, but I really liked
Oscar Isaac.
Hmm?
Again, I only know them by their actors, but the dad, Oscar Isaac's character.
Yes, Oscar Isaac, his performance as Duke Leto was tremendous. It was because I think it was even possibly better than his portrayal in the book, because he really did manage to put across the leadership, the love, the nobility, and kind of the uncertainty but still going forward kind of thing. Especially like when they get the Imperial Decree, which is a scene that isn't in the book, but that really worked to kind of establish quite a few things. And to see that he's not 100% sold on this, but he's definitely never going to back down from it. And I think that was really good. And then then I think we might have to go into spoilerverse for things that I didn't like, because and these are spoilers for the book mostly, but also partially for things that are most likely going to happen in the second movie and things that happened later in the movie.
Okay, so we're diving into the spoilerverse. So if you have yet to see Dune, the 2021 film, we're going to be spoiling what happens in the movie and a bit of what doesn't happen because of the book. So there'll be a time code in the description where you can skip around. We're now inside the spoilerverse.
And you need to stop me if I'm going on too long for some of these things.
Honestly, I look at your list of criticisms. I'm like, I don't even know what half of them mean. So I'm curious to see what you say.
Okay. That's fine. Well, okay, so the first one is the Doctor.
Okay.
Yue, Dr. Yue. His betrayal completely had no impact. And at first I thought they were doing the whole book, so I'm like, okay, they cut that part. But so there's two things. One is that in the book you learn that his wife apparently was killed by the Harkonnens, the enemies of the main family, but actually she was being kept and tortured, and that's part of why he betrayed them. But there's also a lot that goes around explaining that he's actually he's trained at the Imperial Academy of Medicine, and the little diamond on his forehead is actually a seal that says that he's been conditioned, like he's been psychologically conditioned to be unable to harm the people he works for. So both in following the story in the book and in universe, nobody thinks he's the traitor, because everybody thinks it is completely impossible for him to have been the traitor. And I don't know how you would organically put all of that, but there are some scenes that I think may have been a little overindulgent and could have been shortened. Or if you were going to add something in the movie, definitely, I think it would be give Dr. Yue a real character, so that his betrayal stings, but also so that it could set up other things to happen in the second movie. Because a big plot point that doesn't happen is that Gurney Halleck, Duncan Idaho, and Hawat, I forgot his last name, but basically the three top officers of the Count all suspect Lady Jessica of being a traitor. And that's just nowhere in the movie, and it's something that becomes much more relevant later in the story.
Okay, so even that detail about like what that gem is on his head, if they had found a way to like incorporate that into the movie, then I think even I would have been.
Yeah,
I would have. Oh, like
just mention that, remember, he's a Sook doctor who can't betray the people he works for. You can trust him. And they did have a certain level of that where he was trusted to observe Paul alone, and he is pretty much the only person that would have been trusted to be alone in a room with Paul, because paranoia about spies and such. Well, him and again Gurney and Duncan Idaho, but that's kind of, if you could explain that, yeah, it definitely would. I think it would have added to that and added to kind of but I think even if you would have added something to say that his wife was killed by the Harkonnens, it would put more surprise that he's, betraying his family for the Harkonnens, because it seems like he should hate them as much as everybody else there.
Okay, you mentioned Jessica. I know it was a big thing that they tried to improve and give all the female characters larger roles than they originally had in the source material, to the point where
She's
they
actually
say
an
like
exception
Jessica's
to
like a
that.
main protagonist in the movie.
Yeah, she is in the book too. Her role actually got diminished from the books. I think partially because there are some of her subplots that didn't exist because some of the characters weren't characters, or were very different, or were just less present in the movie. Yeah. Sorry, I wrote Mentats got jibbed. Well, Mentats never got mentioned in the movie, so I think it's because, again, they're trying to cut some of the reference to Islam that weren't super positive, let's be honest. And one of them is talking about this historical event, which is called the Butlerian Jihad, which was a holy war in which any computer that mimics human intelligence was destroyed. So there are no computers in the Dune universe. Instead, there are these humans who are trained to compute data, and they're called mentats. And they never touch on it, but they do have them in the, well, they have one in the movie, and then there's another one technically in the movie, but he never does any computation, which is one of my nitpicks, is that Peter never gets to do computation. But Howat is one of them. He's the guy who kind of just flashes, like when he rolls his eyes back to literally calculate the cost of a space trek in the scene of the Imperial Decree. Well, that's, what mentats do. They calculate things, except they also compute like the possibility of events happening. They're basically, they're
Actuaries.
trained and almost bred to be human computers. Which Paul is one, or is trained to become a mentat, which is also not touched upon, and I don't think it will be. I think that everything to do with mentats is kind of going to be pushed aside, which I'm a little sad. And yeah, the other mentat is, who never does the eye rolling back thing, is Peter, who's the big bad, the Baron's right-hand man. Not the one played by Dave Bautista, the other one who's like smarmy and has too much eye makeup.
David Desmalchin.
I did not know that was the actor. But his character got pretty much erased in the story, so I guess it doesn't matter that much, but it would have been cool to see him do some computation the same way, so that it's like, oh yeah, he is a mentat. It's cool. They're there.
Okay, but that just sounds like they're just trying to condense it. Like, that sounds like that's part of the world that they just decide to not have be in the movie to save time.
But they still showed it, and they still included the scene in which Howat gives his resignation to the Duke, and that doesn't really fit. Given what we've been presented, it should have been either Duncan or Gurney who presented their resignation.
Well, he doesn't accept it anyway, so...
Well, I know, but that's the point, is that's one of the scenes I would cut, because that scene doesn't lead to him being more suspicious of Lady Jessica, and it doesn't actually get explained what a mentat is and why he's the one apologizing, so why is it in the movie? Which, again, I think, and this is where it's spoilers, it might have to do with the second part, because in the book he is captured by the Baron and forced to work for him. And so maybe they're going to keep that, and that's why you had like a show of loyalty and maybe a little bit of him being suspicious that there was a traitor and being suspicious of Lady Jessica, which happens later. But I don't know how they're going to go around with that. And the other scene that I would just axe was the one on Salusa Secunda, which is the planet where the elite force of the Emperor are. And I just think it wasn't necessary to show the planet. And also, the planet is a prison planet, which I think they were kind of maybe showing, but not very well. And if you're not showing that it's a prison planet, and you're not showing that it is they were kind of showing it was a planet with a harsh environment, but not very clearly. And so, again, spoilers. One of the reasons the Emperor was afraid of Arrakis is because it's a planet that's very harsh, like the planet where he trains his elite guards. And so he's like, oh no, somebody else might get elite guards, so I can't let too many people get into that. And I just feel like the information that was given in an earlier scene where the Mother Superior speaks to the Baron already conveyed the information that was being conveyed in that scene, and so it could have just been cut. And this is more of a nitpick, but the elite guards are supposed to live like kings. After their training is done, they basically are supposed to be like not just kneeling in the rain waiting, but living a lavish life. So yeah, that scene just kind of didn't really work for me. And the last legitimate thing, because I think the other one is a bit more of a nitpick, is kind of the final scene, the duel that Paul fights against one of the Fremen to get accepted. First off, I think it shouldn't be in this movie. I think it should be in the second movie. Although I understand that him being accepted by the Fremen is kind of important, but at the same time, in the book, because they accept his mother and him as being young enough, he is not directly accepted, but enough to be able to go live with them, which I think is all that was necessary. And I understand again that it's a climactic fight, but in the book it happens in the siege. around the entire community, which I think is more important. And it's after this that he gets his Fremen name, which is part of him officially joining. And to have it right in the middle of the desert, it's not just story-wise that it's a problem. The other problem I have with it is the guy insists on fighting him despite the fact that it's daytime and it's going to become very dangerous. And that goes against the entire character of the Fremen. They are very, very practical. They survive in the desert because they know what the best way to live in the desert is. And it seems just really stupid that he would have challenged him in the heat of the day in the desert to a fight. And then I have the nitpick that goes with the Cry's knife, because every time a Cry's knife is taken out of its sheath, it needs to take blood, which they did do in the final scene after Lady Jessica disarmed their leader. They all kind of slit their wrist a little bit, like the top of the wrist, a little bit to bleed on their knives. But when Lady Jessica was presented the Cry's knife in front of a non-Fremen, which is a big no-no, it wasn't blooded. And like, I know that's a nitpick, but it's also a little bit of like kind of the Fremen history and mentality that wasn't well portrayed, and that kind of in a movie that otherwise did pay a lot of good attention to details, it seemed like it should have been done.
Yeah, that totally went over my head in terms. I never noticed that. I didn't, but I guess you're right. Like it is a nitpick in the sense that it sounds like they're doing that with everything in the lore. Like they're adapting a lot of it faithfully, and they're just making like seems like an honest mistake, because I can see they had to end their movie on a with a climax, and that stopping point of like, okay, I'm now going off of these people who trust me. Like that seems like a good place to kind of pause the movie.
Yeah, but I still think that like getting away from the worm could have been, and then joining after Lady Jessica proves her worth, still would have been an emotional like climax, and it still would have worked for the end of the movie, I think.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, my two random questions. One, what happens to Josh Brolin's character? We never see him die. Like you see him, he's fighting.
He becomes a spice smuggler.
Okay. Do you think
then eventually rejoins with Paul later on?
Okay, because I was like, what happened to him? Like he's the only named character. We don't really see what happens to them, and I was like, is that a plot hole? Like, where's he?
No, I think it was definitely intentional, and he is coming back later because that's what his character does.
And then two, during the battle where they the enemy comes and takes over the Atreides house, Duncan Idaho runs off with one of the planes, and he seems to he uses that for the rest of the movie. But then when Paul and Jessica take a plane, they shut it down because they're like, oh, we don't want them flying our plane, and so they have to walk. My question: if they have the power to remote shut down their aircraft, why didn't they do that with Duncan's plane?
Because it wasn't a Harkonnen aircraft; it was an Atreides aircraft.
But they looked the same. How could you tell?
Presumably because one can be remotely set off by the people and the other one can't.
So in this world, the different cultures are different. They use the same kind of vehicles.
Well, yeah, because all the equipment that was left on Arrakis was left by the Harkonnens, and that's one of the big gripes that Duke Leto has with the. So yeah, it doesn't fully make sense, but they did definitely bring some of their stuff in with them, and I do believe that in the establishing shot before Duncan Idaho shows up, he is piloting one of the Thopters, and so it might have just been his private one.
Okay. Now your comment, Buon, is that a reference to the music?
Yeah, no, it's just the music was really loud, but we kind of talked about that. I think I talked about most of the things. Also, I think Professor F mentioned they're paying a lot of attention to Chani Zendaya. Zendaya. I always get her and the Overwatch characters mixed up. She's really not that important. I mean, she's Paul's concubine and gives birth to his children, but she has very little importance in the books beyond being that.
Change the books. Don't forget, they could have changed it.
Yeah, I know, but it still seems weird that they also have so much of her, but not. She appears a lot for somebody who did nothing in the movie.
Is she in the visions in the books as much as she is in the visions here?
No. But she is she is in them, but not as much. There's a lot more visions of his future war that happen. But she definitely is in the vision. Just I don't think as much. But I also think that some of the visions are not her. I think that the visions of a girl walking with a blooded cries knife and blood on her hand is actually Alia, who is Paul's little sister, because I mean we're still in the spoiler first. She ends up killing the Baron after they try to make her marry him later on in the book, and she is also born Fremen because she's going to be born, after in the siege because Jessica is currently pregnant with her. So I think but I did actually very much like that the visions weren't fully clear because, Paul, like, they were very vivid. And, like, for the final duel, he kind of had a vision of the duel, and it wasn't quite sure if it was a vision or not. And I like that because the visions are supposed to be very vivid, but not fully under his control yet. And so that, I think they did a very good job of that, actually. Yeah, the other things,
You didn't like the voice.
Yeah. The voice. Okay, I was thinking about the other one. Yeah. The point of voice is that it sounds like a normal person talking, but affects you subconsciously. So, like, I understand you can't really portray that in a movie, but I still did not like the way they chose to portray it, like, with the sound effects. I thought it was a bit tacky, and I thought the same thing in the previous movie, the way they did it. And I'm going to be honest, I don't have a better way to do it.
Maybe they need to wave their hands while they do it.
No, no, because then you mistake finger language for voice, which are different things as well. Which I really like that they did that properly and subtitled it. That was great. No, the other thing is that when they come to Arrakis, I feel like they don't quite highlight how the difference between Arrakis and Caladan psychologically affects the characters. Like, there's that one scene where Gurney Halleck and Duke Leto are kind of like watching, and they're like, "We have to close the doors now." But that wasn't much. Like the scene where Paul is walking by the palm trees, I feel like he should look more uncomfortable. He should look like this is weird and alien, and I'm still trying to get used to it, because that is kind of an important part of kind of the general malaise that's happening on this planet. Is partially because, yes, there's probably spies everywhere and the Harkonnens left traps, but also this is, you went from a world that has luscious clouds and vegetation everywhere to the most desertic planet in, probably the history of sci-fi.
Okay, so with in mind that we don't know if we're getting a part 2, you wrote down some predictions.
Yeah, I shared one of them. My prediction that part 2 is not going to be as good, I think I kind of stand by. I think that even if we do get a part 2, it is going to struggle because I feel like a lot of the things that they cut out become more important in the second part of the book, and I think it's going to be the second part is going to be much more streamlined than the second part of the book is, and I think it's going to affect the story negatively, partially because there's a lot more kind of inner dialogue, but also there are kind of political happenings that haven't been set up yet. But that being said, I'm happy to be disappointed with not disappointed. I'm happy to be proven wrong, which I was by this movie. Not disappointed at all. So, who knows? It might happen. But I do still stand by the prediction. I don't think they will even if the second part happens and does well, I don't think they'll adapt the second book.
So coming around to final thoughts, Dune 2021 took a gamble by choosing to only adapt half of the first book without official announcement as of the time of our recording here of a second film. We do run the risk of essentially getting an incomplete story by only getting this film. But having said that, even if they don't make part 2, I would still say I enjoyed this movie a lot. I stand by what I said earlier. This is probably the best film I've seen in theaters since I saw far from home. I had to say that again in 2019.
Yeah. No, I think, like I said, despite a lot of nitpicks and like some random things happening, like, you know, when they focused on that mouse, that's, you know, I feel like it was a good introduction despite having a lot of things for the fans. That generally, like, the problems I have don't break it, but they do change the story in such a way that it won't be the same, but it's an adaptation. So as far as movie adaptation of Dune, it's, yeah, I think probably comparable to Peter Jackson's adaptation of Lord of the Rings, where everybody said it was impossible to do, and they're like, yeah, no, maybe it is.
And as somebody who has not read the books or knew nothing about it, I was able to come into this and enjoy it. So, you know, Professor F gave it 8.5 out of 10. I'm very mad he doesn't remember that we do things out of 4 bat cookies. I guess that translates to like a 3.7 or something. So Professor F, we can say, gave the movie 3.7.
You go first.
Okay. Well, so considering I said it's like the best movie I've seen in a couple of years, I guess I have to rate it fairly high. I'd give it like a 3.8, I think.
Yeah, I think I would go with Professor F, give it a 3.7. If that's not exactly what it amounts to, that's what I'm giving it.
Whatever 8.5 out of 10 converted into 4 is.
Because I do think there were possible improvements. Like, it's not a perfect movie, but what it does change was mostly for the best, and it still is an excellent movie. Yeah.
So this is our public service announcement. If you have
Read
HBO,
Dune.
if you have HBO Max, watch Dune on repeat so that it can get good numbers there. And if you
or go see it in theaters, honestly, it is a visually, and you know, the sound mixing is a bit off, but when it isn't, it is stunning sound design. So like, go see it in theaters if you can.
Yeah, go see it in theaters. But if you have HBO Max, put it on repeat there so that it'll get traction, and hopefully like its success on HBO Max will be a good counter argument to that. Well, it didn't make money at the theaters, but it was really popular on streaming, so we should get that sequel.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
Or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
So normally we go inside the Bat Jar and pull our topic for next week. I'm sure you're not excited about this, but the third My Hero Academia movie is getting a limited release in North American theaters this coming weekend. So obviously we haven't generally done like full on reviews of anime movies when they've come out here, but
did we do Your Name?
We spoke about Your Name. We kind of like promoted it, but we didn't do a review of it. So I would love to even just do an episode of My Hero Academia and then just tie it into the movie, but we can also just go into the jar.
I'm fine with talking about My Hero Academia. I think, you know, I clearly I don't like it as much as you do and as much as the world loves it, but I feel like it's still a good series and one of the better animes out right now. So,
all right,
you know,
cool. So if you do live in the United States or Canada, check your local listings because My Hero Academia has a new movie that'll be out for like, I think for the weekend, next weekend. So make sure you go and see it. We'll talk about it along with the whole series next week. And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
And I'm Beef Pork Ribs.
Catch you on the flip side.
The spice must flow.